The wind howled across the plains like a wounded beast, carrying with it the bitter scent of gunpowder and pine. Snow fell in thick, merciless curtains, cloaking the land in silence. Evelyn knelt in the drift outside the cabin, her skirts soaked through, her breath trembling as she clutched the newborn to her chest. The baby whimpered softly, a fragile sound swallowed by the storm. Behind her, the door to the cabin hung open, firelight spilling out in wavering bands of gold. And in that doorway stood Thomas, her husband, his rifle still smoking, his face carved from stone. The year was 1865. The war was done, but the land hadn't found peace. Men carried ghosts in their pockets and guilt in their eyes. Out here beyond the Missouri line, the world was still raw and untamed, a place where law came at the end of a barrel. Evelyn had followed Thomas west in search of a new beginning. What she found instead was a wilderness that demanded more than it ever gave. The child stirred. Evelyn pressed her closer, whispering a prayer that froze before it reached heaven. She dared not look at the man behind her. She knew the shape of his silence, the kind that came after a shot, when the world seemed to hold its breath. Thomas stepped into the snow, boots crunching softly. He was lying, he muttered, more to himself than to her. He would have brought them here. Evelyn looked up, eyes red from the cold and something deeper. He was begging Thomas. He wasn't armed. Thomas's jaw flexed. He wiped the rifle barrel clean with the hem of his coat. Men don't come begging this far out unless they've got something to hide. You don't know what kind of devils are roaming these trails. She rose slowly, the baby swaddled in a rough wool blanket. Her voice was soft, but it carried weight. "And what kind are you, Thomas?" He flinched, a muscle twitching near his temple. The wind tore between them, lifting her hair like flame. He looked away first, back toward the body lying by the fence, a dark shape half buried in snow. They had built this cabin together 2 winters ago, every log notched and stacked by hand. The promise of the frontier had been sweet then. Fertile land, fresh starts, a place untouched by the ruin of war. But the war had followed him, followed them both, in whispers and nightmares. There were things Thomas wouldn't speak of, faces that haunted his sleep. Evelyn had learned to stop asking. Inside, the fire snapped and spat. The room was small, just a bed, a table, a cradle Thomas had carved before Clara was born. The smell of pine pitch mixed with iron and smoke. Evelyn laid the child in the cradle, her hands shaking. "Who was he?" she asked without turning. Thomas shut the door against the wind, said his name was Carter, claimed he fought under Harper's unit. "You knew him?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Or men like him?" Evelyn's eyes caught the light as she turned to face him. "He said your name before you pulled that trigger." Thomas froze, his breath clouding in the cold. "You heard wrong." "I didn't." The silence between them stretched thin as glass. Thomas looked to the floorboards, then to the window where snow pressed against the pane like a ghost trying to get in. He'd killed before, on battlefields, in taverns, when law was a luxury, but this felt different. The man's eyes had been clear, not the eyes of a threat. There'd been something like recognition in them. He poured a measure of whiskey into a tin cup and drank it down in one swallow. He wasn't alone, he said, finally. "If he found us, others will too. We'll leave at first light." Evelyn gathered her shawl tighter. "You said that before. And before that. You keep running, Thomas. But from what?" He stared into the fire, the lines of his face deepened by the flickering light. "From the past," he said quietly, "and I mean to keep it buried." Her gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You can't bury what's already part of you." Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills, though no storm followed. The baby began to cry, thin, desperate, alive. Evelyn moved to comfort her, whispering the lullaby her mother used to sing. Thomas listened, the sound of her voice piercing through the walls he'd built. When the crying settled, Evelyn stood by the window, watching the snowfall. The land stretched out white and endless, no tracks but their own. She imagined what it would feel like to walk until the horizon swallowed her, to leave behind the blood and the fear and the man she no longer recognized. Thomas rose and pulled on his coat. "I'll take care of the body." "Leave it," she said sharply. "He deserves the ground, not the snow." He looked at her, eyes hollow. You think the ground cares? Maybe not, but I do. He sighed, slinging the rifle over his shoulder, and stepped out into night. Evelyn followed to the door, holding the lantern high. Snow spiraled around him as he dragged the body toward the fence line, each step heavy, labored. She could see his breath, the faint glow of firelight on his coat, the shadow of the man he once was dissolving into the dark. When he was done, he stood over the shallow mound and removed his hat. For a moment, he looked almost human again. Then he turned back toward the cabin, his eyes catching hers in the lantern's glow. No words passed between them. None could. Evelyn stepped outside once more when he had gone in, kneeling where the blood had melted the snow to dark slush. She pressed a hand to the earth, her fingers stiff with cold. God forgive us, she whispered. The wind shifted, carrying her voice into the void. The prairie stretched silent and endless, indifferent to sin or sorrow. Behind her, the baby began to cry again, a soft, wavering sound that cut through the night, like a thread of life refusing to break. She stood, gathering her shawl around her shoulders, and looked toward the horizon where the storm gathered strength. Somewhere out there, she thought, someone would come. Men who knew the stranger. Men who carried the same hate that Thomas once did. Inside, Thomas sat by the fire, staring at the rifle laid across his knees. His hands trembled slightly, though he'd never admit it. The light danced on the walls, flickering over the cradle, the table, the 2 tin cups that had once symbolized a shared future. He looked up as Evelyn entered, her face pale, eyes hollow but unyielding. We can't stay, he said. No, she agreed. But we can't keep running either. He didn't answer. The fire hissed. Outside, the snow thickened, swallowing the world one quiet breath at a time. That night, neither of them slept. The wind clawed at the shutters. Wolves howled somewhere in the distance, their cries echoing across the plains. Evelyn sat by the cradle, rocking the baby with slow, steady motions. Thomas kept the rifle close, every creak of the timbers tightening the knot in his chest. As dawn bled into the gray sky, Evelyn rose and opened the door. The snow stretched untouched, cold and clean. She stepped out barefoot, the chill biting at her skin. Behind her, Thomas called her name, but she didn't answer. She knelt in the snow once more, eyes closed, the world around her holding still. For a moment, she felt nothing, no pain, no fear, no sound, only the vast, indifferent quiet of the frontier. And in that quiet, the world seemed to stop breathing. When she rose, the sun had not yet broken the horizon. The wind had calmed, and behind her, Thomas stood watching, silent, unreadable, while the firelight from the cabin flickered weakly against the snow. The storm came 3 nights after the shooting. By then, the body beneath the fence was buried deep under snow, and the land around the cabin had turned to a white, unbroken sea. The wind screamed across the plains, rattling the shutters like restless ghosts. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long, trembling shadows over the rough-hewn walls. Evelyn sat by the hearth, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of water gone lukewarm, watching the flames struggle against the draft. Thomas paced behind her, boots thudding a steady rhythm that gnawed at her nerves. He hadn't spoken much since that night, and when he did, it was in half-formed sentences muttered to himself as though warding off something only he could see. The whiskey was gone. The food was nearly gone. Evelyn had begun counting the days by the creaks in the roof beams. The baby slept fitfully, wrapped tight, in a quilt that smelled faintly of wood smoke and fear. You're wearing a hole in the floor, she said quietly, not looking at him. He stopped pacing but didn't sit. I can't rest. Not while they might be out there. She turned her head, studying him. His beard had grown coarse, streaked with gray she hadn't noticed before. His eyes, once sharp, full of restless fire, had turned hollow, reflecting the dull glow of the dying fire. You don't even know if there's anyone to fear. There's always someone to fear, he said, and crossed to the window. The frost had crawled halfway up the glass, muting the world beyond. He wasn't lying about them coming. I can feel it. Evelyn sighed, her breath trembling in the chill air. You keep saying that. Maybe you're just feeling what's already inside you. He looked over his shoulder at her. You think I'm losing my mind? I think you're already halfway there. He laughed then, a short, bitter sound that broke like ice. Maybe that's the only way to survive out here. The wind rose again, slamming into the walls with a low, guttural howl. The fire guttered. Evelyn set down her cup and went to check the cradle. The baby's cheeks were flushed, her breathing shallow. Evelyn pressed a hand to her forehead and felt the fever burning there. Panic tightened her chest. She's burning up, she said. Thomas came to her side, his shadow looming. It's the cold. She'll sweat it out. It's not the cold, Evelyn said sharply. She needs medicine. I told you we should have gone to the trading post when we had the chance. He shook his head. Too dangerous. If Carter found us, others could be watching the trails. She's dying, Thomas. His voice hardened. And if we leave, we'll all be dead. You want that on your conscience. Evelyn's eyes blazed. You think you're the only one carrying guilt in this house? You think I don't see what this is doing to you, to us? Thomas turned away, jaw clenched. He went to the table, picked up the rifle, and began cleaning it with deliberate care, as though the ritual itself might hold the world together. Evelyn held the child tighter, feeling the heat rise through the blanket. Hours passed. The storm worsened. The roof groaned under the weight of snow. Evelyn rocked the baby, whispering, "Hush now, hush, little one." Her voice cracked with exhaustion. Each gust of wind sounded like the breath of something waiting just beyond the door. That night, Thomas finally spoke of the thing he'd kept buried. His words came rough and low, carried more by the fire's hiss than his own breath. I left them, he said, during the war. My unit, we were ambushed near Franklin. I ran, left men bleeding in the mud. Carter, he was one of them. Evelyn froze, her heart thudding. And you thought killing him would erase that. Thomas's hands shook as he set down the rifle. He said they were coming, that they'd never stop hunting the coward who ran. Maybe he was right. She stared at him for a long moment. You can't outrun what you did, Thomas. You can't shoot it away, either. He said nothing. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, something howled, animal, or maybe just the wind pretending to be one. When morning came, the storm had buried the world. Thomas was still by the fire, staring at nothing. Evelyn stood at the window, the baby limp in her arms, her skin pale as the snow outside. The fever had worsened through the night. Evelyn felt the weight of the choice pressing against her like a hand around her throat. She looked back at Thomas. I'm going, she said. He didn't look up. You step outside that door, you'll freeze before you make it halfway to the ridge. I'd rather freeze than sit here and watch her die. Evelyn. She was already moving, pulling on her coat, wrapping the baby in another blanket. Her hands shook as she tied her shawl under her chin. You can stay here with your ghosts. I'm taking my chances. Thomas rose, suddenly, anger flaring behind his eyes. You think you can survive out there alone? You won't last an hour. Then it'll be an hour more than this, she said, her voice steady, final. He reached for her arm, but she stepped back. The look she gave him froze him in place, cold, fierce, unyielding. For the first time since the war, Thomas didn't feel like the stronger of the two. Evelyn opened the door. The wind hit her like a wall, stinging her face and stealing her breath. She stepped into it anyway. The snow swallowed her footprints as quickly as she made them. Thomas stood in the doorway, helpless. He watched her vanish into the storm, a small figure cradling an even smaller one, swallowed by the endless white. He wanted to call her back, but the words wouldn't come. His throat burned. His hands trembled. Finally, he shut the door and leaned his head against it, listening to the wind carry her away. Evelyn walked until her legs felt carved from stone. The snow rose to her knees, then her waist. She could no longer tell the difference between the sky and the ground. Both were the same cold, merciless shade of gray. The baby's breathing had grown faint. Evelyn pressed her closer, whispering the lullaby through chattering teeth. Hours passed in a blur of white. Once, she thought she saw movement, a flicker of light far ahead. She stumbled toward it, her strength draining with every step. When her legs gave out, she crawled, the baby bundled tight against her chest. She found the remains of a barn, its roof half collapsed, its interior filled with snow and silence. She crawled inside, teeth clattering, breath ragged. The baby barely stirred. Evelyn tore open her coat, pressing the child against her skin, sharing what little warmth she had left. Her mind drifted to the river where she and Thomas first met, to the way he'd smiled before the war took it from him, to the hope she'd once carried like a candle against the dark. The wind howled through the broken boards. She hummed softly, her voice trembling. "Hush now, little one, hush now." At dawn, the storm broke. The world outside gleamed with cruel beauty, every branch glazed in ice, every surface shining. Evelyn lifted her head weakly. Smoke curled in the distance, a thin gray ribbon against the pale sky. She blinked, unsure if it was real or another trick of the cold. With what strength remained, she rose, clutching the baby close, and stumbled toward it. The snow gave way under her feet, each step heavier than the last. She could hear the faint crackle of fire now, smell the promise of warmth. Her knees buckled. She fell forward, still shielding the child. Her vision dimmed, the sky above blurring into white and gold. A shadow moved across her, blocking the sun. The last thing she saw was a figure standing over her, tall, wrapped in a weathered coat, the outline of a rifle at his side. Then everything went quiet. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the world was still and pale. She lay beneath a rough wool blanket, the scent of smoke and pine thick in the air. The fire beside her crackled softly, throwing orange light across the cabin's log walls. Her limbs were heavy, her breath shallow, but the first thing she did was turn toward the cradle of blankets near the hearth. A soft whimper answered her. The baby was alive. Relief came like a flood. She pressed her palms to her face, trembling, tears hot against her frozen skin. The sound of boots on the floor made her flinch. She turned to see a man standing near the stove, a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair silvered by age and cold. His coat was worn, his face lined with years of hard living, but his eyes were calm. "You've been out near 2 days," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of prayer and regret. "Lucky I found you when I did. Storm nearly buried the barn hole." Evelyn tried to sit up. "The baby—" "She's fine," he said, nodding toward the small bundle. "Hungry, but fine." He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Name's Jonas. Used to be a preacher long time back." She accepted the cup, her fingers trembling. "Evelyn." He nodded once. "Your man close by?" She hesitated. The question hung in the air like smoke that refused to rise. "He was," she said at last. "Don't know if he still is." Jonas looked at her for a moment, reading the exhaustion and sorrow that no words could hide. "I've buried too many who waited too long for forgiveness," he said quietly. "You want to rest, but not too long. The snow's turning soft. Travel will be easier soon." She nodded, though the thought of returning to that cabin twisted something deep inside her. "I can't go back," she whispered. Jonas didn't argue. He simply nodded again and turned to feed the fire. Sometimes forward's the only way left. Outside, the storm had spent itself, leaving a fragile calm in its wake. The horizon stretched wide and endless, glittering under a hard, pale sun. Inside, Evelyn fed the baby from a small tin of milk Jonas had warmed. Each breath she took steadied her resolve. She could leave it all behind, the guilt, the fear, the man who had become more ghost than husband. But the past, she knew, had a cruel way of finding its own path home. By the second night, when the sky burned violet with the promise of another storm, she heard the distant crunch of boots on snow. Jonas stood, his hand drifting toward the rifle by the door. Evelyn's heart sank even before she saw the figure emerging from the treeline. Thomas. He looked older, colder, his face hollow beneath days of sleepless travel. His coat was rimed with frost, his eyes wild from worry or whiskey, she couldn't tell which. When he saw her through the cabin window, he froze. For a moment, he simply stared. Then he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Evelyn stood, holding the baby close. The warmth she'd once felt at the sight of him had long since died. "Eve," he said, his voice breaking on her name. You're alive. Thank God. Jonas stepped between them. She's safe here. Thomas's gaze shifted to the older man, taking in the rifle at his side, the calm authority in his stance. And who the hell are you? Someone who saved what you nearly lost. Thomas's jaw clenched. You don't know what I've lost. Jonas's eyes narrowed. I know the look of a man who keeps losing because he won't stop fighting the wrong war. The words hit like a blow. Thomas turned to Evelyn, desperation bleeding through his anger. You don't understand, Eve. They're coming. Carter's men. Maybe already close. We've got to move now. She shook her head. You said that before. Always running, always with a reason. But it's not them you're running from, is it? He took a step closer. I did what I had to do. You killed a man begging for mercy, she said, her voice steady, quiet as snowfall. And now you come here with talk of ghosts and vengeance. You're the only one they're chasing, Thomas. The rest of us are just caught in your shadow. The baby stirred, a soft cry piercing the silence. Thomas looked at the child as though seeing her for the first time. His face softened for an instant, then hardened again beneath the weight of everything he'd done. I can make it right, he said. If we leave tonight, I can keep you safe. Evelyn's eyes glistened in the firelight. Safe? You don't even know what that word means anymore. Jonas took a slow step forward, voice calm but firm. Son, you should lower your gun before you forget why you came. Thomas blinked, realizing only then that his hand had drifted to his holster. He hesitated, then let it fall away. I just need her to understand. I understand, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. You're a man the war never let go of, and maybe it never will. But I can't keep dying with you piece by piece. The fire popped, a sharp crack that made all three flinch. Then from outside, a sound carried through the still air, a horse's whinny, then the unmistakable crunch of multiple boots on snow. Jonas moved to the window. He wasn't wrong, he said grimly. You led them right to us. Thomas cursed under his breath. We can hold them off. There's 2 rifles, 1 door. Jonas glanced at him. You want to die proving something fine, but she's got a child. Evelyn backed away from the window, clutching the baby tight. Shadows moved beyond the tree line, figures spreading out, circling. Thomas loaded his rifle, the motions automatic practiced. They'll come for me first, he said. You stay down. If I can draw them away. Stop it, Evelyn said. No more running, no more fighting. It ends here. He looked at her, and for the first time in years, she saw the man he had been before the war, a man who laughed, who dreamed, who believed the world could still be kind. He gave a small nod, as if some truth had finally settled in his bones. The first shot shattered the window. Jonas fired back, quick and precise, his voice steady. Keep low. The door splintered under a second volley. Thomas moved without thinking, firing through the opening, covering Jonas as he reloaded. The room filled with smoke and the acrid smell of powder. Evelyn crouched by the hearth, shielding the baby, heart pounding like a drum. Thomas shouted over the roar, Get her out, preacher! Back window. Jonas grabbed her arm. Go. She hesitated, looking back at Thomas, his silhouette framed in firelight, his rifle steady, the ghost of a smile on his lips. Go, he said again, softer this time. Evelyn turned and ran. The cold night swallowed her as Jonas led her through the snow toward the trees. Behind them, the gunfire raged, then faded, then stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. By dawn, the smoke from the cabin curled into the pale sky. Evelyn stood at the edge of the clearing, the baby pressed to her heart, tears freezing on her cheeks. Jonas rested a hand on her shoulder. Neither spoke. The world was quiet again, too quiet. She looked back once at the small black ruin against the white expanse, then turned away. As she walked, her voice rose faintly above the wind, carrying a final whisper. You can rest now, Thomas. The snow fell soft and endless, erasing their footprints as they vanished into the light.